Hi, everyone. I am Jeanette Mulvey, the editor-in-chief of Co. by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to this episode of Start, Run, Grow. So there is a lot going on in the world of small business, and today we're going to discuss it all, from concerns about a recession and inflation to hybrid work and hiring challenges. We will cover how your business can get through all of it. Throughout the program, you can ask our speakers questions and engage in our poll a little later on. Now, before we get started, I would like to thank today's sponsor, Dell Technologies, and our series sponsors, Salary.com, FedEx, Iron Mountain, MetLife, and Oracle NetSuite. We appreciate all of your continued partnership in this series. So I'd like to get right to it and introduce my first guest, famous for his ability to make complicated topics super easy to understand and for answering all of our many, many questions over the last couple of years. We are now joined by Neil Bradley, Executive Vice President and Chief Policy Officer here at the U.S. Chamber, and he's going to break all these issues down for you. As always, if you have questions for Neil, please feel free to put them in the chat box on the right side of your screen, and I'll definitely ask them of him in a little while. Welcome, Neil. Thank you so much.
Hi, Jeanette. Good to see you. Great to be with you all again.
Yes, very much for doing this. So I am just going to cut right to the chase. Everyone wants to know, nobody can agree. Are we in a recession or not?
Well, it depends on who you ask, right? Let's start with the textbook definition. The textbook shorthand is 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth, meaning the economy is contracting. In at least the preliminary data, we had that for the first half of this year, both Q1 and Q2. But there's also lots of weird things going on. Normally, when you have an economic contraction, you're not seeing lots of hirings. Well, we have businesses hiring people every day, 528,000 last month. Usually, when you have an economic recession, consumers are pulling back their spending. But the latest data shows that consumers aren't just spending more because of inflation, they're actually spending more even with inflation factored in. So I think rather than the question of whether or not we're in a recession or not, the truth is that we're in a odd economic time with lots of factors pointing in opposite directions. And it's probably a sign of the fact that in, frankly, most of our modern lives, we've never been in a period where we have inflation this high, but this strong and this tight of a labor market and this much pent up savings that are setting in consumers' banking accounts. And so you add all those things together and you get a weird mix, and that's where we're living today.
And that pent up savings, do you think that's primarily a result of the pandemic?
It is balances in personal accounts and savings and checkings accounts went up during the pandemic, not just because of government payments, although that was part of it, but because people changed their spending patterns. So, in the last 2 years, families may have not taken a vacation. Now, the money that they would have spent on that vacation, maybe they spent some of it on goods, but they saved part of it as well. And so at the moment, we have savings that people have built up that we're continuing to work our way through.
Okay. So for a lot of us, the easiest way to spot inflation is to see the prices at the gas station as we drive by. And those prices seem to be coming down, but are we still seeing inflation? Are prices overall still going up, and or are we plateauing? What's happening with inflation?
Well, it's very high. It's 4 decades since we've had this high of inflation. We got the latest numbers earlier this week. It's kind of a mixed bag. So if you're looking for silver linings, the silver lining is that from June to July, prices overall didn't go up. Now, if you look under the hood, under that top line figure, you'll find that that's not true for all prices. You mentioned gasoline. Gasoline prices have come down from June into July and are continuing to come down today. Yesterday, for the first time since I believe March, the national average settled in at under $4 a gallon, still much higher than it was a year ago, but at least moving in the right direction. but the cost of other things has continued to go up. The three things I took note of in the most recent data was food prices, where we're up 10.9% year over year, but also electricity prices. So, we couldn't do this show without electricity. You couldn't run a business without electricity. Electricity prices are rising, as are the costs of shelter. So rent that people are paying. Obviously, interest rates, if you're buying a new home, are much higher than they were a year ago. So between food and electricity and shelter, we continue to see rising prices, and we continue to see overall really, really high inflation.
Okay. Any sign? We have no indication of when that's going to slow down, right?
We do like to see that, month over month, no increase. So, the economists call this, the turnover, when you make the turn, when prices stop rising and begin to fall. But we have a long way to go. So we are still really high elevated prices. We continue to have a lot of pressure on pricing. The workforce shortage, for example, the housing shortage. Those are two shortages that are really hard to fix, particularly quickly. And as a result, housing prices, labor costs are going to continue to push up. And so we're going to continue to see these inflationary pressures in the economy. We are not getting back to 2%, 3% inflation anytime soon.
Okay. We mentioned housing and shelter costs, which brings me to interest rates. Now, our audience, interest rates as it pertains to buying a house may not be of interest to our audience as much as interest rates as it pertains to getting financing for your business. So can you talk about interest rates a little bit?
Yeah, so the principal way that the federal government combats rising inflation is by raising interest rates. The Federal Reserve, which is responsible for setting interest rate policy, when it wants to curb inflation, and they do so by cooling demand, they raise interest rates. That means that it's more costly to borrow and spend, and you have a greater incentive to save rather than to consume. And so while they raise bank lending rates, essentially, that trickles down into other interest rates. Obviously, the rate for mortgages, but also your rate on your revolving credit, on credit card loans, also the costs of business borrowing. All of those costs, those interest rates costs, are going up, which means that if you're relying on a revolving line of credit, or if you're relying on future loans to help support or expand your business, the cost of those loans is going to be more expensive. And in the aggregate, fewer people will take out loans. And so that's how the Federal Reserve is trying to address inflation. That's one of the reasons that you're seeing rising costs of borrowing for businesses and families across the country.
Great. And before I move to our next question, I just want to remind the audience that they can ask questions of Neil. I'm going to get to those in a minute, so go ahead and make sure you're putting those in the chat. We talked about that the labor market is still strong. So businesses are looking to hire, struggling to hire. I saw several articles last week that alluded to the idea that there just aren't any more people for small businesses to hire. I was just telling you about my husband's small business. It has everyone we know and are related to working because the labor market is so tight. So it's a real struggle. Can you talk about that? Are you seeing in the numbers that it's easing up? Finding people to
No,
hire is getting
no,
easier.
it is, and in some ways, I think we're almost doing it a disservice to say that the labor market is tight, because we've all experienced periods where it's harder or easier to hire, and the labor market is loose or it's tight. We've actually never experienced anything like this. So we've been keeping data going back about 70 years now, really good labor market data. And we've never seen anything like this. We essentially have 2 job openings for every person who says they're out looking for work. That is a historical mismatch. And so when you say your husband's business, when you hear from small businesses who say there just aren't any more people to hire, that's reflected in the data, and that's a reality. And so part of it is that our labor force, as the size of our population and the size of our economy, is smaller today than it was before the pandemic. Some of that is demographic change as the baby boomers get older, reach retirement age, and exit the labor force. Some of it is because people have made lifestyle choice changes as a result of the pandemic. In households where you might have had two working parents before, you may now have only one working parent. In older households, maybe not typical retirement age yet, but people who are a little before retirement age, who figured out that they had the financial resources to retire, they've decided to retire early and to exit the labor force. And then in some instances for good reasons. We've seen a record number of new business starts. I suspect some people in our audience have started their business in the last year and a half. Before that, they might have worked for someone else. Now they own their own business and they're looking to hire people. And so you have those type of lifestyle changes that have gone on that are contributing to it, in addition to the fact that we have really low levels of legal immigration, people coming to this country legally to work, and that's created its own shortage in the labor force.
Yeah. So let's get back to the recession. For people in our audience, if we're not in a recession yet, and a recession may still be possible, are there things small businesses can be doing to prepare themselves financially for the possibility of a recession?
Absolutely. Let me give you the top two things that I would recommend. The first is to be very focused on the data about how your business is doing day to day. Not how the overall economy is doing, not people's attitudes towards the economy, but how is your business doing? One of the remarkable things that we're seeing, we saw it in our own survey that the U.S. Chamber does with MetLife on a quarterly survey of small businesses. We've seen it in other surveys of large businesses where individuals, business owners, business leaders are responding to the survey and said, I think the economy is in real shambles, in real trouble. If they believe we're already in a recession and that we're heading to a deeper recession. But then when you ask them about their business, they say their business has never been better. It's doing great. And so my advice to business owners, to our members at the U.S. Chamber, is forget all that noise that you hear out there about the economy as a whole. How is your business doing? And make sure that you're tracking that data, pretty much day to day, so that you can begin to see if demand is beginning to soften and you need to anticipate changes in demand. You can also analyze how much of your increased costs you're able to pass along to your customers. So we know that your costs are going up and you have to factor that in to the prices that you charge. Do you begin to see a softening when you have to raise prices? Or are your customers willing to pay the elevated prices? Pay attention to those signals. Then, based on that data, have some contingency plans for your future. And that's my second bit of advice. What is the plan for your business should demand fall 5%? Should it fall 10%? Is your current business plan contingent on having to finance or refinance either expansions or acquisitions or new equipment or a new facility, whatever it is in the future? Are you reliant on some type of borrowing or refinancing that's likely to cost more over the course of the life of that loan more today than it maybe when you had planned on it? How do you factor that into your business plan? And so begin making those contingency plans so that as you follow the data, you know exactly what to do in terms of your employment, in terms of your pricing, in terms of your level of operations, and importantly, your level of debt.
Great. That's really good advice. So thank you. Now, speaking of preparing, a different kind of preparation, we, saw terrible flooding in Kentucky last week, and we know that hurricane season is coming. And unfortunately, we know it's inevitable that small businesses will be impacted. Can you just talk a little bit about SBA disaster loans, first of all, because I think there's a little bit of confusion with most small businesses about how those work, and then just more generally how businesses can prepare and be a little more resilient and prepare for disaster.
Yeah. So let's start with the second part of that first. Particularly, a lot of small businesses who are in disaster prone areas have had to have plans in the past, kind of understanding what happens, with a flood or a wildfire. The reality is today a lot more small businesses are likely to be impacted by this growing number of natural disasters. We seem to keep having once in 100-year floods or once in 1,000-year floods. So our advice is that every small business needs to begin thinking through, what is your resiliency plan? How do you either sustain your operations and the result that your facility has to close? How do you keep your employees? What are the things that you need to be prepared for should, unfortunately, disaster strike your small business? And our friends at the U.S. Chamber Foundation actually have a whole host of helpful tools for businesses to prepare and then how to respond to if you're impacted by a disaster. The same is true of our friends at the Small Business Administration, who, in addition to having resources to help you prepare for a disaster, also do provide various loan options should a federally declared disaster impact your business and your business not be able to get financing elsewhere, either to help with the reconstruction and the reopening of business, or to meet your ongoing costs during the period that you're shut down because of the natural disaster. And so there are multiple types of these disaster loans. We all talked about EIDL loans, economic injury disaster loans, during the pandemic, which is a type of loan that was modified in response to COVID. But there are also regular disaster loans that the SBA administers that help you deal with the cost that insurance doesn't cover when you're rebuilding or reopening your business.
Okay, that's great advice. And if we want to know more about the U.S. Chamber Foundation's disaster assistance programs, they can go to the U.S. Chamber Foundation website and get more information there. Neil, I am going to go take some audience questions. You mentioned the SBA in terms of the EIDL loans, but in terms of general financing, SBA loans for businesses looking to expand, are those loans protected from interest rate increases? They're not fixed rate, correct?
No. I mean, you do have some benefits relative to the cost of non-SBA borrowing, but you are not fully insulated from changes in borrowing costs.
So this person's question is, are there any small business financing options that are sheltered? I don't know the answer. Do you?
That I think it is. You may be able to get a loan that obviously has a fixed interest rate on it. There are fixed rate products. You may end up paying a premium for that fixed rate product, but you're still going to be paying more today in interest rate for that loan than you were a year ago. And so, the cost of money has gone up, and that will be reflected in whatever type of loan product that you ultimately use.
Okay. So another person asked, is there, so as businesses are paying more and more for supplies and for labor, is there any sort of rule of thumb they were asking about how much you should be saving, even though your costs are going up? The first place that could be depleted is your savings. And I will add I'll let you answer that first, and then I'll ask you a second one.
I don't. I assume that there are different good rules of thumb for business, and I think part of it would depend on what your average costs are, your revenue model, et cetera. And that's something that you would want to really dig into, particular to your industry and to your business operations. Listen, I think one of the things that surprised me a little bit in our most recent MetLife US Chamber survey of small businesses about inflation was how many small businesses were relying on loans to deal with rising costs. And so, I think to the extent that you're using financing as a short-term measure because you're confident that you can be able to pass along those increased costs to consumers, or you have another way of offsetting those costs, that might make sense. But I think to the extent that you're not able to pass along your increased costs, and you're not able to offset those increased costs in your own costs of operations, just relying on financing, I think, is not going to be a durable solution for very long at all, for virtually for any business.
And you sort of touched on what the second half of my question was going to be, which was about raising prices. I think businesses are hesitant to do that, but really sometimes they have no option. Do you have any examples as you talk to business owners about the best ways to raise prices? Do you find that communicating to customers the reasoning is helpful?
I do think you have to communicate to your customers. Particularly, we were talking earlier about contracts and estimates, and so if you think about construction industry, for example, in which you may have provided a quote to a customer 6 months ago. And since then you've seen nothing but steady price increases for your costs of doing that project. I think you have to have honest conversations, both with the customers that you're providing quotes for today, but maybe the customers you provided quotes for previously, that says, listen, this is going to have to be adjusted depending on what happens with input prices. And so, those who aren't already incorporating some way of adjusting the costs of the goods or the services they provide to reflect sudden increases in prices really risk getting caught in a moment in which you're actually losing money on the work that you're doing. And of course, you really can't do that for very long.
As you said, there are probably a lot of people in this audience that are brand new small business owners or haven't even registered their businesses yet. Are there, in this economic environment, are there business entities that would be preferable in terms of how choosing which entity to register your business as, an LLC versus an S corp? Are there, in an environment like this where maybe it's difficult to get financing and there's inflation, are there any benefits to one over the other?
That's an interesting question. I'd not thought about that in terms of the concept of which incorporation vehicle you would take. I don't, I don't know that it would fundamentally shift your costs of financing. If you have the ability to raise capital by issuing shares to essentially be an S corp, and operate that way. Maybe that would be more advantageous in this moment. But I don't know that I would be picking my form of incorporation on the basis of the economics of this moment versus your long-term plan for how you want to own and operate your business. And so it's worth thinking about, but the more I think through it with you live at the moment, I'm not sure that I would make a decision like that purely based on the economics of the moment.
Do you have any thoughts about how smaller businesses can compete with big businesses when it comes to hiring? We know that, I've seen those commercials from Amazon that are saying, we'll give you a flexible schedule and you can pick your shifts. I mean, they've been very able to be very flexible and accommodating with employees, and small businesses don't always have that option. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I think small businesses have natural advantages that often they don't talk about when they're hiring. A larger company can have a flexible work policy, but it's going to be a policy that's set that covers kind of all of their workers. The benefit and what we hear from employees of small businesses all the time is that that it is like a family often, and an extended family, and in the way that family can help you respond to the most unanticipated circumstance in your life. Working for a small business gives you the ability to work for a business that can respond to those things that are unanticipated without having to do a change in policy that covers their entire workforce. I guess the way I would think about it is really selling the benefits of being a part of a small business family, and being treated like extended family, and having the benefits of that. And so I don't know that small businesses need to compete by trying to overwrite HR policies that mimic what big businesses do. I think they should play to their natural advantage.
Great. In just the few minutes we have left, I think I've been remiss in not asking you the same question I've asked you every episode for the last 2 years, which is there any more COVID financing? I had seen that possibly there was some restaurant funding available, but it was questionable whether that was actually going to happen.
Yeah, there's so the short answer is no. That these programs have run their course. They have expired. There is some legal wrangling going on in Washington right now around some of the restaurant revitalization funding, and whether there is a small amount of money that might be able to be dispersed in those restaurant revitalization grants. The big problem is that the current number of applicants in the queue when the program was shut down, and the assistance that they're eligible for, far dwarfs the amount of money that people are debating. So, the reality is that maybe, depending on how this legal wrangling comes out, there are some people who had previously applied for a restaurant revitalization grant who might get some amount of relief, but there are no ongoing programs that you could go apply for today or request assistance from.
Okay, one more unscripted one from me. Uh, as we go into the fall and then the holiday season and then the new year, any just trends in general, consumer spending trends, just trends that you think small businesses should be paying attention to?
Yeah, let me give you two real quick. Pay attention to consumer spending, but pay attention to your consumer spending. This goes back to my point earlier about recession. See what your customers are doing. We know, for example, based on the aggregate data, that people during the pandemic went from purchasing services because they couldn't get out and they couldn't travel to purchasing goods. And so we saw a big increase in the demands of things that people could buy rather than eating out at a restaurant or experiences that you could buy. Now we're beginning to see that shift back, that people are now making their spending decisions more in services and more in experiences. So track what your customers are doing so that you understand where you are in your business on that transition. The second is to think about it from your supply chain. Um, we all experienced kind of last season the supply chain shocks ahead of the holiday buying season, and how a lot of businesses, including a lot of small businesses, frankly didn't get their inventory until too late. Some actually after the end of the holiday season. You don't want to be in that position again. There are additional, while we've worked through a lot of kinks in the supply chain, there are kinks that remain. Shutdowns in Asia. There are threats of rail slowdowns and rail strikes because of an ongoing contract dispute between railroads and labor. There are just lots of things that could really pop up between now and the holiday shopping season that could make it difficult for small businesses to get inventory. And of course, the ongoing problem that we've already talked about the difficulty in getting workers. So pay attention to your data and get prepared early. Don't wait for your workforce needs or your inventory needs for the holiday shopping season. If you're not already planning now and acting now, you should be.
Well, that is perfect. Thank you so much, Neil. We appreciate all of your advice and information, and I'll be happy to do this with you again sometime soon.
Anytime. Thanks, Jeanette. Thanks for joining us
Bye.
today.
Thanks. Bye-bye. All right, so we are ready for our start session in which we will focus on the new world of hybrid work. We will hear from two small business owners who have been finding ways to maintain that human connection and adapt their businesses, and who have been talking to a lot of other businesses about how they're doing that too. So I am pleased to be joined by Rich Crawford, who is CEO of Talent Reef, which is a talent management platform based in Denver, and Bill Rossi, owner of Chicago-based Rossi Enterprises. Bill is a serial entrepreneur and a fractional COO and CFO. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you, Jeanette.
Thank you.
All right, Rich, I am starting with you. Tell us about your company and what you do and how many small businesses you work with every day.
Sure. Yeah. Talent Reef is a Denver-based software company. We focus on recruiting and onboarding applicants to employers who hire hourly workers. So this could be restaurants, fast food, grocery store, convenience store, janitorial service, all kinds of businesses. And we support about 4,000 businesses across the United States.
Great. And Bill, how about you? Tell us, thank you first of all for joining us. Tell us a little bit about your business, which you have sort of an interesting role.
Hi, everyone. I actually have a consulting business where I'm a fractional COO or CFO for some small businesses across the country. I have part ownership in a handful of those businesses, 8 to be exact. I work in different sectors, the B2B market, the B2C market, as well as retail consumer packaged goods. So I have a little bit of experience in everything, as well as a multi-unit franchise.
Well, I feel like we're really getting our money's worth with you too, because you're not just two small business owners, you're two small business owners who know a lot of small business owners. So I think you can bring some really good insights into like bigger trends. Okay, so Rich, tell us, so your company is helping recruit people to work at businesses. So tell us, where do we stand with hybrid work? Like, is everybody back in the office? Is everybody still at home? Have we settled somewhere in the middle?
Well, Jeanette, for Talent Reef, when we think about March of 2020, we all got kicked out of our office, pandemic related. We moved home. It was sort of interesting. We had already set up our technical base so that everyone had a laptop. Everybody was able to get into any of our internal corporate or tools, communication systems. So we very kind of easily moved away from the office. And I would say that we have not moved back in. I mean, we've got people coming in. We have events where we have people come in. We have planning sessions. But if I were to look at my office, yesterday or today, we've got 2 floors in Denver. Mostly it's empty. So I would say, we're mostly remote, but we do leverage the office and sort of leverage each other when we need to and when we want to. So I would say, in terms of this hybrid environment, we're mostly remote.
Okay. And so do you think you'll stay that way?
I do. I think the employees like the flexibility. They like to be able to schedule, their workday in the way that they want to. They also like to, quite frankly, come in and sort of work with their coworkers, their colleagues, or maybe across departments when they want to, whether it's a planning session or some other type of, perhaps it could even be, somewhat socially oriented. We've got a lot of volunteerism that we do. So our employees will come together and do that as well. So, but I do think that we'll be mostly remote, especially for the type of work that we do.
Great. So Bill, you of course work with many different companies, so you're seeing a lot of different setups happening. So are most of your businesses either in person or hybrid? So I'll let you answer that first.
Actually, all three. So a couple are, the retail is obviously fully, in office, if you will. I have one of my professional services companies that is fully in the office. Majority are hybrid right now. And then I have one that's fully remote.
Okay, so then I think that you're a great person to ask this next question, which is, when you run a business where employees are both in and out of the office, how are businesses adapting to building this trust and knowing that their employees are working and knowing that they're getting things done? What are you seeing, and what are you yourself putting in place to make sure that you're still getting the productivity that you need?
Sure. I actually been working remotely for 20 years now. That's showing my age a bit. But, since the pandemic hit, immediately everybody pretty much went to remote. And we've slowly started going back into the office and the various situations. I like to think of myself as somebody I start with trust, and all the businesses that I'm involved in, I lead with trust, and I wouldn't hire somebody if I didn't trust them. So it's more about maintaining trust for me and the businesses we're in. We do a number of different things. I'll focus specifically on the hybrid situation right now and the fully remote. We do mandatory weekly staff meetings, and those meetings we have everyone share personal highs, personal lows, professional highs and lows. We encourage our team to give shout outs to other people on the team. We basically have created a system in a few of these organizations. For example, we use Zoom video. Everybody knows Zoom, I think, and Zoom phone. And with Zoom video and phone, you can track inbound, outbound calls. You can actually record calls. You can monitor length of calls. You can pretty much see anything anybody's doing as far as a Zoom video meeting or a phone call. And then we've combined that with a software called Triton, which is an employee productivity software, which tracks hardware usage and software usage. So when the computer's going on, when the computer's going off, how many, what websites people are going to, active time, idle time, etc. So we can get a really good full picture of what's going on every day between these two, software programs. And every company I work in, we build accountability charts, which, list roles and responsibilities, and we create environments where people are self-accountable.
Now, you had mentioned to me about Entrepreneurship Operating System, which I had not heard of. And is that what you just described, or is that something different?
No, EOS is the Entrepreneurial Operating System. It's based on the book Traction by Gino Wickman, and I've been working with EOS. It's a proven system to help small and mid-sized businesses go to the next level, scale their business. It's simple tools and a proven process that gives powerful results. Again, I've been doing it for about 10 years. I've implemented in a handful of the companies that I work with. I'll give you an example. I walked in as a fractional COO to a boutique PR firm here in Chicago in June of 2020, right after the pandemic hit. They were doing about $300,000 a year in revenue, and we are tracking 1.8 million this year. So in basically 2 years, we've tripled staff, quintupled revenues, and we're achieving above industry standard margins. So
yeah. Okay, great. So I just wanted the audience to hear that from you, because I think it's something they could research. Rich, let's talk about the hybrid work environment. You said your company, you probably will not come back full time. So you are helping people hire every day in this difficult hiring environment. How has hybrid helped people hire and retain employees, and what kind of advantages is it giving companies?
Well, if you think about our business, Jeanette, Bill kind of mentioned it. You've got retail oriented, you've got restaurant, you've got service businesses. Those people have to be on site. So most of our customers require that type of hiring. I would say so we've got a little bit of a difference here. The way that we think about hiring for Talent Reef is probably different than the way that we help our customers hire. So we've become a lot more flexible. We're hiring people across the entire United States now. Used to be that we'd only recruit in Denver, really, or primarily. Now we've got pockets of employees in different states, different cities. So it's sort of interesting how things have changed, pretty dramatically. On our customer side, though, and they've really struggled these last couple of years. You've got, not only maybe employees or potential employees wanting flexibility, and maybe our customer job types don't provide that because they require you to be in the office or in the retail location. So it's a bit of a challenge, and we know that we've struggled trying to find the number of applicants for our customers. So, it's a different time, it's a different situation. Now, I will tell you what we're trying to do is just try and cast the net wider, try and provide more information. I do think, Bill talked about trust and trust inside a company, but I also think culture. Why would that job be good? So we're probably doing more maybe marketing of these types of jobs and trying to stimulate interest in these jobs that our customers have.
Yeah. Bill, in general, with employees that you have working remotely or hybrid, what is your sense of their job satisfaction? Do you feel like that your employees are more engaged with that kind of freedom?
It's actually mixed, Jeanette. Some of the people love it. Again, they love the flexibility, being able to, work at their leisure. For the most part, it's about getting the job done, getting results. But there's other people that actually miss that human interaction and connection and real life water cooler situation. So it is split. I will say a majority of the people on my teams do prefer the hybrid and are happy. And, we sent out surveys to all of our staff in each of these companies and asked them what they wanted. And we tried to accommodate the majority of the staff.
That brings me actually to you, Rich, we're talking about employee happiness and engagement and productivity. Rich, what are you seeing in terms of the way the companies that you send are thinking about productivity differently?
Yeah, I think, you do have to measure productivity. You have to be clear with employees. I think that this is part of what, as an employer, you want to be clear about what the job is. You want to be clear about what the requirements are, and even about, what the productivity metrics are. I think, clarity, information, being able to report on that, I think that's an important part of this process, not just, come in, show up, and not sure what you're doing. So I do think it does place more of a demand on employees to be clear about what they expect from employees. And I think that's part of the new engagement. I do think there's a cultural aspect around any company. What is that employer situation like? How do they treat employees? What's the interaction between an employer and employee amongst each other? So I think there's a lot of things that go into that mix of what makes a good environment and what makes a good kind of employer-employee relationship. But I think clarity is probably the one that employees really like the best. Is this a place I would like to work? And if it is, what you tell me is what I will experience once I go into that environment.
Yeah. Bill, I think you mentioned that you had asked the employees what their preference was. And I have an audience question that says, what is the best way to survey my employees about whether or not they want to shift to a more permanent hybrid work environment? And before you answer that, I don't think this person is necessarily asking what tools should they use. But if I were asking this question, I'd be asking, how do I ask it without making any promises? So how did you, Bill, ask your employees what their preference was while still keeping their minds open to whatever you ended up landing on?
Yes, fair question. Again, for clarity's sake, we did not make any promises in putting out the survey. We asked for ranges, and we made the surveys anonymous, so that way people felt comfortable sharing what they truly wanted. And again, we told everybody from the get-go, we asked the questions. And again, we found there's quite a few surveys actually online about this. And you can tailor the questions to meet your organization. But that's what we did.
Rich, this person asks a question. I think it's a good one for you. they said I'm paying a lot of money for my office and rent. And if I'm not using it for people to be there every day, then kind of what's the point? And so you said you have 2 floors there in Denver. Are you thinking about downsizing, subletting? What are your general thoughts about owning or renting office space at this point?
Yeah, I do think that paradigm has changed. We are looking at subletting some of that space if we can. And if I were to design the space today, I'd probably design it differently. I'd probably design more collaboration areas. And we have some, to be clear, but I would probably focus more on that, maybe more of a hoteling sort of concept, whether it's open area or small offices. And then I would probably design a space that allows more of a dynamic use pattern as opposed to kind of a daily pattern. So, like I said, we employees love to come in. They love to plan. We've got big whiteboards and they gather around those. So, but I think that space in the future would be more tailored toward that as opposed to having a lot of physical space and everyone coming in and sitting around their desk all day. So, the short answer is, yeah, I would like to have less space, and we are trying to sublet some of our space if we can.
Okay, great. Did you have any thoughts about that same question, Bill?
Yeah, actually, we owned one of our office condos and we sold it because if you're not going to be in it, why have it? And we rode most of the leases out, or if we had an early termination, we executed the early termination. But I'm in full agreement. If you're not going to use the space, why are you paying for it?
Yeah.
Right. Bill, this person asks, and I ask this of you because you have so many companies, are you seeing any trends in terms of the kinds of perks businesses are offering to get employees to be in person?
Yeah, one of the newest ones is, believe it or not, being reimbursed for commuting to and from work. With fuel prices as high as they are, added time onto your day. That is one of the newest things that I've never, in all my years of business, had seen. And now that's just a common ask.
Yeah. What about you, Rich? Have you seen any trends along those lines?
Yeah, I do think it's about being employee centric. So things that an employee would like to benefit from. So we provide laptops. We provide all the technical equipment. We have not reimbursed or seen a request for reimbursement of sort of home office, but I would imagine that maybe kind of a trend. I have seen some companies who've done things like that, but I think it's again kind of more in this area of flexibility, including where we've had especially in the summertime, flex days or encouraging people to take time away from not just the office but their work. So I just think it's around this general theme of flexibility.
Yeah. In just the couple of minutes we have left, I'm going to start with you, Bill. If you could just give like one short piece of advice to a small business owner about how to actually make hybrid work beneficial to them, what would that advice be?
I would say utilize the productivity tools that you can find, and also, again, culture is king, flexibility is key right now. I have made it my mission to build a tight-knit team, and I would recommend we're doing this in numerous companies, but we're alternating happy hour and in-person lunches every other month. Just to get the team together in person, quarterly staff, photo shoots, for updating the website for new hire presentations. So when somebody new starts, they're telling about their life, how they got to be who they are. And also I started a wellness series just for some work-life balance and, doing some virtual yoga, virtual meditation, numerology, cooking classes, wine tastings. These are all very inexpensive. I mean, you can set a budget for a couple $100 a month and do coaching and all of these things. And it helps build cohesiveness amongst the team and gives them something fun to do.
Yeah, I love those ideas. Thank you. And Rich, last question for you. The same question. Are you, how can a business make this hybrid work environment work for them?
Yeah, I do think it starts with measuring everything, and it can be challenging for smaller businesses who maybe don't have as much of the tool set. And Bill mentioned that. I completely agree. Try and measure everything. Try and gather data on everything. Make it clear, what you're trying to achieve. And if you're focused on achievement as opposed to just spending time, then I think you've largely solved that issue. And then I do love some of the comments that Bill's made. We do the same thing. We have monthly all hands. We have tools like Slack, Teams, Zoom. We during the pandemic we had virtual happy hours. Now, it's even employee driven. We have more employee driven get-togethers. So all of these things are important to maintain communication, maintain culture. But I do think it starts with how do we measure the performance of productivity. And that's also something that we feed back into the employee base. We give them rewards, awards, talking about what they've done, not only for their own team, but across the company. So just some ideas I think will help any business out there.
Well, that's great. And that is actually all we have time for today. So I want to thank you, Bill. Thank you, Rich.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
Take care, you guys.
Yeah.
All right, audience, before we shift to our next segment, I would like to know where you are in your remote hybrid work world. So please take the poll that you will see on your screen. And the question is, how does your team work right now? So we have mostly full-time in office work. And I can see 100% remote. Yep. Okay. So we're kind of all over the place here. I see that with the hybrid, it's very unusual to have a set hybrid schedule. So I think that we're all sort of living in that world where workers are doing what's best for them and what's best for you. So thank you, everyone, for voting in that poll. Okay, so we are going to shift gears now, and we will jump into our run session. I would like to introduce our guest for this. His name is Alan Klingerman, and he is the Chief Technology Strategist, North American Channels at Dell Technologies. And he is here today to talk about how small businesses are using technology to facilitate all this hybrid work we've just been talking about. Hi, Alan.
Hello, how you doing, Jeanette?
Good. And audience, feel free to put your questions for Alan in the chat box, and I will ask him some questions later. Alan, I read your title. I still have no idea what you do. So can you tell us what your job is? And we'll go from there.
Sure. I work with all of our partner community, working with customers throughout all of North America. So thousands of small business across the country, and get to see and have an opportunity to work across technology solutions across the entire Dell technology spectrum. My focus is more in the data center, but I work quite a bit on the client side with all of our customers, specifically in this hybrid workspace.
So I love this because this means that you also can give us sort of a high level trends view of what you're seeing small businesses across many industries do. So that's really valuable to us. Thank you. So where do things stand with hybrid work as far as what you're seeing? Are most employees back? Are most still hybrid?
I love the conversation you had in the previous segment, and I can't agree with some of the statements more that they brought up. And in fact, when I think about hybrid work, we've kind of categorized it, and certainly in all my conversations with accounts, everybody's still a little bit all over the board, but it's really about work from anywhere. And I go back to, I used to work at Citrix. Some of you might know the name, the world's largest provider of virtual desktop technologies out to the marketplace for the last 20 plus years. And, they physically thought about their real estate different. Long time ago. I worked there well over 10 years ago. And it's back to what they just talked about of brick and mortar. How do I think about it differently? And what could I do with that real estate? We think about it in context of, using that workspace in different areas. I love what he said about whiteboards and collaboration spaces, because that was a big area. And I would agree that was actually a big draw to get people to the office, because they had an opportunity to get together in that environment, interact with their teams, and be creative, right? It's that spontaneity that sometimes I think we miss, within the, full remote work environment. And then you think about quiet spaces and being able to do it from that perspective, and even being able to have one-on-one quiet areas for when you're having meetings with your employees. But it's important to think about this in hybrid work and what's happening out there. But everybody is at different states of, I think your survey said it all. Everybody's in different states today of their adoption level.
I love that you're a technology guy and you're talking about spontaneity and creativity. I think that really speaks to this moment in time where everything is about all of those things, and you need the technology to do it, which is exactly what you and I are going to talk about in a moment. Let's just talk a little bit about this hybrid work environment and what you're seeing in terms of people's company's ability to hire and retain employees.
Oh, that's so important. I think we've seen, certainly in this time of, no matter how you look at it, the quote unquote, the great resignation of this year, and certainly coming out of the pandemic, I think we're seeing it even within our own company, right? Of being able to attract and retain the right talent. It's extremely important to be as flexible as you can to make sure that we're bringing them in and activating them back in the workforce. And I can tell you, like, from the time the pandemic started, it was pretty interesting to watch our evolution. We've been, obviously, as the world's largest provider of IT, even we, to many degrees, have been on this journey of what this means for the company, and how do we, mobilize all of our workers with technology and enable them to work from anywhere. But we still hadn't fully embraced it. This forced us to do it, and the IT tenants that we put in place really enabled it to happen. To go, hey, we had 30,000 people in the offices that immediately, right, was able to just shift to remote work from anywhere to be able to continue, to conduct business for us.
Yeah, so let's talk about the technology that's driving all of that, right? So we all know, Zoom and those kinds of tools, but can you talk more generally about how businesses are leveraging technology and thinking about doing that in a way that's smart, that's sustainable long term, and that can scale as their business needs change?
Oh, I love what you just said there. Those are so important, because a lot of people don't even think about it. And that technology is, just like fleet management of anything else you might have from an asset perspective. It's extremely important because it does empower our business to do everything we're trying to accomplish, right, in the remote workspace. I'd say, first off, you probably have seen this, and certainly in the supply chain, maybe felt some of the pains here of what's happened, right? We just went through the greatest client refresh in the history of technology. So desktop and laptop, people were out refreshing technology because, frankly, many times we were behind, right? We were catching up, or just buying mobile devices to enable to keep our business to continue to function. So laptops and desktops are definitely still the predominant areas. As you would imagine, the shift really made a significant move, right, from the desktop space to the laptop space. And that's where we're encouraging the investment from our businesses, right? Really think about it from a laptop and mobility perspective. And then we think about the offices or the workspaces that we're trying to enable within our homes. I loved what the last two speakers said there too, of like, I think there is a stipend that should happen for those employees, and maybe it's by price band, because these are some of the things we're doing of, like, depending on the employee and how much we're paying them, we might provide lower level employees stipends to give them a fully functioning home office, because we're thinking about our physical real estate difference. We're collapsing offices. We're doing exactly what I described to you earlier. We're taking advantage of the opportunity to never go back the way it was. And what are those other technologies outside of the laptop and desktop? We've become and created small production homes in our houses, right? Webcams, lighting, microphones, speakers, like the growth in these areas are huge. And in order to support those software platforms, like you just said, from a collaborative perspective, like Zoom, I need to have a high-speed, high-performant platform, and I need to be able to think about a life cycle, right? Just like I would a vehicle over a 3-year period, I need to think about what that refresh cycle looks like to make sure that I'm, keeping constant technology in front of all of my employees. Because the other thing we found is that employee NPS really goes up based on the technology they have, especially as we're attracting newer, younger people. They're used to having the latest and greatest. And if you don't have that as within your company and providing that, they kind of see it as a negative, right, to join your organization.
The other day, you and I were talking, and you mentioned this concept of business continuance. Can you talk a little bit about what that means, and then how that relates to this idea of leveraging technology, not just for this hybrid environment, but for what might be coming next?
No, it's a great one, and I brought up that concept of even business survivability, right? I think we just lived through the greatest business continuity test plan or tests that ever occurred in the world through the pandemic, right? And you looked at what happened, right, of U.S. corporate bankruptcies in 2020 at the highest level in over a decade. And I think we all know what we've lived through. And so this was one of those things. Did I have the technology in place to continue to function, right, so my business could function and provide goods or services to support my customers? And then we think about not just those things occurring, right? That's one of those, a pandemic. Who would have ever guessed, right? None, think about that insurance policy. It's an insurance policy. But you think about other natural disasters that are occurring throughout the world today, fire, flooding, et cetera. These are things we need to think about, because in this digital world, how do I take the data, because the data is the most important thing, and transport that data around to protect the business? Without that data, in many cases, the business can't function. And being able to support that in the realm of also things that are happening out there. I think we all know ransomware and cyber recovery is a big issue. Like if you take a look at a couple of analyses that just came out from Cybersecurity Ventures, we're on target to see a ransomware attack every 11 seconds. So if you had a ransomware attack and your data was at hostage, right, all of your business data, all of your customer information, what would you do? If you haven't solved it, that's the concept of a business continuity plan. And how do I build this, what we call a BCP, or a document that consists of the critical information, classifying that data and understanding its criticality to the business, and what are those systems, right, or applications that are tied to that data, and what state do they need to come up so I can continue functioning as a business?
Right. Okay. I think that's a lot for people to think about. So thank you. One of the things that becomes a challenge, of course, we've all experienced this, is that you could have the best technology at your company and you are all communicating really well with each other, but then inevitably you have to be communicating and working with people at other companies who don't have technology on the same platform. Can you talk about that concept of having a technology that can communicate with other companies and how you can plan for that?
Yes, I think it's super important. And if you just think about the easier aspects of this, and again, in your previous segment, they talked about, I loved it when they talked out and called out specific names that many of you probably are familiar with: Teams, Slack, etc. Just start small, right? These software as a service applications are easy to subscribe to, and think about those platforms that your other business entities that you work with, right, that are your partners, what are they using? Because to have that interoperability between that application stack and that document is extremely important, right? And then you think about that data integration. Again, if everything's about data in the technology space, how do I, expose that data, and how do I use data that's out there for my partners? So for example, maybe you're selling a good or service on Amazon, and maybe you're used to going into your portal and seeing and looking at your stats. But wouldn't it be much more powerful, by the way, if you don't know, they have the ability through an API to pull all that data back so you can compare it against other things you might be doing in the business. So having that, think about it as EDI, or electronic data exchange. That's fancy name for, just like you might use Quicken today, being able to exchange that information. That's EDI, pulling information from your bank and reconciling it. It's the same type of thing. Wouldn't it be powerful if I had those type of connections to other businesses to get more value out of the data around my customers, to approach them with new goods or services, right, at a more intelligent time?
I have an audience question here that I really like and want to give you a chance to answer. The person says, what's the first question a small business owner should ask when deciding to make a big tech investment?
Wow, that's a big question, because it really depends on the technology stack, in my opinion. So if you're thinking about it in the perspective of the client side, let's kind of stick there for a moment. Especially in the small business side, many times you are utilizing software as a service. So some of your biggest technology investments might be around the client and around your services. I think the biggest question is, from a long-term perspective, you have to think about life cycle, and what are they going to do to provide supportability of either the application or device over the time that you're going to own it, right? Net depreciation schedule. And what does that look like to migrate the most important thing, a product, like I said, device, or a service? How are you going to migrate that data, right? Because again, the data is the most important thing. How do I easily, port that application data that lives on that device or lives in that service, and port them from one to the other?
I have another audience question that asks, how should businesses think about cloud-based applications and tools versus, premise-based, on-premises based? Do you just have any thoughts about that kind of balance?
Yes, I certainly do. And notice that I leaned in, and probably some people would be surprised to hear, since I said I'm a data center person, that I leaned in on software as a service first. But I completely, we take a multi-cloud approach at Dell Technologies. And when we think about that, especially as you're growing your business, the easiest way to step in is software as a service, right? Because, hey, I can subscribe to it. If I don't like it, I can unsubscribe. I can easily shift around versus, standard software applications. So software as a service, setting a cloud-based motion, should be the first thing you think about of a new application. If you can't find an application in your industry or vertical, right, there's lots of common business functions there. But if you go, hey, I can't find this specific thing I need, or I need to have data that, for compliance or regulation reasons, that needs to live on-prem, that's where I should really think about the infrastructure, right, and keeping that on premise. And I'm probably going to have, again, a multi-cloud world. I'm probably going to have some framework setting out there in the public cloud, like I just described, of SaaS-based frameworks specifically. And then I'm going to have probably some on-premise equipment to support and protect the data that I just described, right? That's the heart of the business.
Right. Okay, great. So we're just about out of time. Any just last minute advice you want to give small businesses here, maybe who are just starting to build their business? We have a lot of startups just starting to build their business, about like the very first kinds of technology they should be thinking about.
I would definitely say the first thing from a small business perspective is all around the device, right? And making sure don't underbuy. People have a tendency to underbuy looking at price bands. You can buy a lot of technology these days for a little money, right? Like laptops under $1,000 can be super powerful, but don't necessarily, move down to the $400, because you're going to have a bad experience overall as you start to ask more of that employee and use some of these, modern collaboration tools. And I'll also give you this, just a word of encouragement to all of you in growing your business. I've seen it time and time again over my 30 plus years in IT, and it's only become more relevant in the last 5. In the past, we used to see that big companies are eating the small ones. In today's highly competitive environment, what we're finding that the fast companies are eating the slow. And by the way, fast and nimble companies are who? You're fast and nimble now more than you'll ever be, right? You have the opportunity to disrupt your industry or vertical, and use data to empower your customers, and really sell more goods and services to increase your revenue and profit.
Well, I can't think of a better place to leave it. So thank you so much, Alan. It was really a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for the time.
Take care. All right, audience, we are ready for our Grow segment. We are going to see a really great interview with co-features editor Barbara Thau. She interviewed Austin Allison, who is the CEO of Picasso. Now, Picasso, if you don't know, is a real estate platform. It's a very hot startup designed to help individuals with second home ownership. And Austin is going to share with us the lessons that he's learned about how to deal with changing work trends. So let's listen in.
So in 2020, entrepreneur and former Zillow executive Austin Allison launched Picasso, a real estate platform that helps people buy second homes affordably and hassle-free using a co-ownership model that aims to serve an unmet need in the consumer market, in the consumer housing market. So today, Picasso customers co-own homes across the US and Europe in 40 markets, from a house in California wine country to a villa in Ibiza, Spain. So 6 months after launching the business, Picasso reached a $1 billion valuation, one of the fastest companies in the US to achieve that coveted unicorn status. But here's the thing. Austin will tell you that Picasso was not an overnight success. Its origins date back to Austin's start selling real estate as an 18-year-old and the lessons he learned in the years spent following his entrepreneurial muse while working 3 jobs, living paycheck to paycheck, which led to his first stint founding a real estate startup in 2008, and then Picasso. I'm so pleased to welcome Austin Allison, who will demystify how he built Picasso from nothing into a 300-employee company, and he'll offer actionable lessons for all entrepreneurs and small businesses. And we'll also share this moment we're in now, how Picasso is capitalizing on the remote work trend for growth. Welcome, Austin. So glad to have you here.
Thank you, Barbara. It's my pleasure. Really appreciate the opportunity.
So just to talk about what Picasso is exactly, essentially, the business model aims to reduce the costs and the hassle of second home ownership. I would love to know how the brand was conceived and how it fills an unmet need in the housing market.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess to start with an explanation of what it is, Picasso is a service that helps people to co-own homes together. And the way that it came about, this was actually an idea that I started thinking about in some form, really dating back to my childhood. As you mentioned, I grew up in a modest household. My father was a carpenter, and we lived paycheck to paycheck. So I never had a second home. I was like many families, or we were like many families who dreamed about owning a second home. And along the way through my entrepreneurial career, eventually about 8 or 9 years ago, my wife and I were able to buy a second home in Lake Tahoe. And that home became our happy place. And I wanted to find a way to make that dream possible for more people. And one of the things that I learned about second home ownership and second home communities in particular is that second homes are highly underutilized, meaning most second homes sit empty for 80 to 90% of the year. And when a home sits empty, it creates a lot of problems for the housing industry and for the community at large. It strains local businesses because owners aren't there to support the restaurants and markets year round. It actually drives up home prices because as second home buyers are buying up these homes just to sit empty, it takes away inventory from the local workforce and makes it harder for people to afford primary homes. So what we're doing at Picasso is really introducing and enabling a more sustainable and more efficient use of this housing stock, which creates more opportunity for the local workforce to be able to afford primary homes and creates more opportunity for second homeowners to buy and own these homes in a more sustainable and responsible way.
And if you can explain how just the model works, how the consumer goes about participating. I know it's very tech enabled.
Yeah, absolutely. So the entire experience is technology enabled, from the way that we identify the properties to the way that we operate and maintain the properties on behalf of the owners. But the experience is very simple. You simply go to our website at picasso.com, that's PACASO.com, and you find the home of your dreams, and you can buy into that home as little as 1/8 or 12.5%, or as much as 50%, depending on how much of the home you actually plan to use in a given year. And Picasso manages the entire experience. So we're paying the bills on behalf of the owner, we're coordinating repairs and maintenance, we're designing and furnishing the home so that the owners who actually own the property just get to enjoy that home without any of the headaches that are customary of home ownership in general. And the ownership model is actually quite similar to a model that's been around for a long time, which we describe as DIY co-ownership, do-it-yourself co-ownership. Oftentimes, family members or friends or children who inherit homes from their parents will own homes in an LLC. So that's how the ownership is structured. Every home is owned in a property-specific LLC, and the owners of the home just collectively own the LLC, and that's how they actually own the property. So it's a pretty common ownership structure that's been around for a long time, but the service that Picasso is providing is new, and that service is what makes this experience seamless for all of the co-owners.
So there's the differentiation factor. And what's interesting is also that you're doing this now in a moment where we're, the sharing economy with the Ubers of the world. The consumer is now accepting of them, that has adopted that behavior, right? A little about your background, just to sort of pull the curtain back on all your experience and how that informs, your ability to launch a business successfully. So looking at my cheat sheet, you started selling real estate, as I said, as a teenager. That you had some lean years, following your entrepreneurial muse. You then founded your first startup, a real estate transaction tech business, Dotloop, which streamlined real estate transactions. Zillow acquired Dotloop in 2013, and you continue to run it at Zillow. So that's a really rich background. I'm curious about what were some of the challenges that you faced during those pre-Picasso years, and what is important to say about how they informed how to successfully launching a business.
Yeah, well, the challenges that we faced were really endless. I mean, I'm no exception to the rule of life and the rule of business, which is that there's a lot of highs and there's a lot of lows, and it's really the journey, the collective journey over a period of years that really makes the experience so rewarding. But for me, I would say a lot of the things that I experienced early on in my life really translate well into what I experience and have learned in business, which is number one, there's a lot of challenges along the way. Like when you're introducing a new business, you're really sort of creating something from scratch in many ways. And anytime you're creating something from scratch, there's some resistance that you'll face along the way, just getting people to understand your idea, getting people to change their habits. All of these things are just difficult. So what I've found is that following your passion and really believing in the mission deep down in your heart is probably the most important thing that you can do to overcome those challenges. Because when you're pursuing something that you really believe in and solving a problem that you've experienced firsthand, it gives you this level of like intensity and belief and faith about the idea that is sort of a superpower in a way. Like regardless of what you face in the way of challenge or resistance, if you believe in what you're doing, you're just going to keep pursuing it, day after day after day. So I've experienced that in many aspects of my life, and I certainly experience it in business every single day. The second thing that I would say that I've learned that's true of life and business is that you really need to surround yourself with great people. I've found that we're kind of an average of the people that we surround ourselves with. So, if you want to build a technology company, it's helpful to be surrounded by people who have experience building technology companies. Or if you want to be in the real estate business, it's helpful to surround yourself with people who have experience in the real estate business. And over the course of my career, from Dotloop to Zillow to now Picasso, I've been really fortunate to be surrounded by a lot of great people. And I think that had a lot to do with why we were able to sort of hit the ground running with this business, is we had a lot of the right people in the right seats right out of the gate. And to your point earlier around the overnight success, I don't really believe in overnight successes. In my experience, they generally don't exist. Well, oftentimes what appears to be an overnight success was a lot of work, and effort leading up to that perceived overnight success. So in my case, like the people who started Picasso with me are people that I've been building relationships with and or working with for more than 10 years in most cases. So like the 10 to 15 years that we worked together leading up to this moment really enabled us to be more equipped with this business than we were 15 years ago when we were working on my first company together. So I would say that those are the two biggest lessons: follow your passion and surround yourself with great people.
To those points, there's also the notion of institutional knowledge, which is important, right? And what's interesting is if you could talk about what you specifically learned, and we talked about this, from your role as both an entrepreneur and then an executive at Zillow, that was key to launching Picasso, and that all entrepreneurs can glean from and benefit from.
Yeah, well, I would say that, one thing that you mentioned around the institutional knowledge is definitely something that I think all entrepreneurs can benefit from. Like the more time you spend in an industry or in a type of business, you acquire a lot of knowledge and experience that is pretty invaluable. I started selling real estate when I was 18. I'm 37 now, so almost 20 years. I've been in the real estate business, and it's been 15 years since I started my first company. So I've learned a lot about the real estate industry. I know what motivates real estate agents, how they think, what their pain points are, how the brokerage industry works, how MLSs work and trade associations. And, I could rattle off all these things about the real estate industry that are sort of tribal knowledge about our industry that someone from outside the industry wouldn't know until they spent years and years in the industry learning all of those things. So I think there's definitely value in compounding knowledge over time. I forget which book it was, but I read a book at one point that was talking about mastery and how it takes like 10,000 hours on a task before you become kind of a master of that task. And there's lots of other examples of this from, I remember people talking about Tiger Woods would hit something like 1,000 golf balls per day, or Michael Jordan would shoot, X number of shots per day. Like all of those activities contribute to this level of experience and knowledge. And I think that's really, really valuable for any entrepreneur, is to compound that knowledge over time. And I would say, beyond the other two things that I already mentioned about following your passion and surrounding yourself with great people, if I had to add just one more, it would be the importance of just grit and perseverance. Like what I've found is that I mentioned the roller coaster analogy, where there's highs and there's lows. And oftentimes we just read about the highs. Like, you talked about our unicorn status in 6 months. That was cool. That was a nice little milestone that we experienced. But like, there's a lot more things that we've experienced that were struggles, or low points than high points. And what I found is that those struggles are where the magic happens. Those struggles are what build character, and those struggles are the moments where companies and people become the best versions of themselves. So I think it's really important to embrace the struggle and really live in the moment, as opposed to waiting for some, high point at a future date.
That's really incredible that you said that. One of our earlier speakers said that he heard Tyler Perry, the super successful entrepreneur, said, "The struggles are your blessings," which is to your point. I wanted to just talk about, demystifying, pulling the curtain back on scaling the business. You reached that 1 billion unicorn status in 6 months. I think that if you can pull the curtain back on what the keys were, I think you and I talked about 3 factors that were really instrumental to scaling the business.
Yeah, absolutely. So number one, we already talked about, is surrounding the company with with great people. I mean, if there's a shortcut in business, that's the one, so that was really important. And the people who started Picasso with me are people who I've been building relationship with and or working with for 10 plus years in many cases. So that's very helpful. A second thing that I learned on my first company was the importance of market sizing. My first company, Dotloop, it was a great, or is a great software that's adopted by a lot of real estate agents. I mean, we had something like 1 million real estate agent subscribers on the tool. So a lot of people use the software, but it didn't become that big of a business in terms of the value and the revenue. And it's largely because of the market size. There's just not a lot of dollars that are spent on an annual basis on productivity software in the real estate space. So with Picasso, one of the things that's really cool about our opportunity is that it's a massive, massive opportunity. I mean, there's about 100 million second homes around the world, and most second homes sit empty for most of the year. And there's, many tens of millions of people who aspire to own second homes, but are unable to afford or justify owning the whole thing. So we have an opportunity to impact millions of people and really make communities better and introduce a more sustainable solution to the housing industry. And that's largely a function of the size of the opportunity, which is, I think, pretty important to note. And then I would say that the final piece is around really starting small before you go big. And another way to describe that is becoming operationally excellent on a small scale. Before you can scale up, it's important that the model is kind of working. It's important that you have product market fit, meaning you have a product that people are interested in, that they're willing to buy, and you have a model that delivers value for the customer before you start to scale it up. And we were able to do those things, pretty quickly in the early days of Picasso. And I think that had a lot to do with our really strong start.
Just to sum up your second point for our viewers, what you're talking about is the total addressable market. And what you learned from Dotloop was that, and the takeaway for viewers would be find a market where there is enough opportunity, right? Essentially.
I don't think that should be the number one thing that an entrepreneur considers. I think entrepreneurs should really focus on problems that they believe in, regardless of how big the market opportunity is. But if the question is framed around scale, how do you get to scale really quickly? I think total addressable market matters, right? Because it takes a smaller percent of a big market to create a large business. Whereas if the market size is smaller, it creates a larger percent of the market to create, a large business, which is harder to do.
It's an important distinction. I'm moving ahead fast because time is running out, and we have so much to talk about still. But I'm curious about, when you launched your business, you conceived it before COVID, but you launched it during COVID in October 2020. And obviously the world changed. And with the growth with hybrid work, really redefining a market, how have you leaned into hybrid work and work from home how have you capitalized on that to grow the business?
Well, we've not just leaned into hybrid work or really fully distributed work, but we jumped in, head first. Our company is fully distributed. We've got around 300 people on the team, and we basically have no offices except for one small office to collect mail, but we don't have a headquarters office. Everybody works remote. Our team is spread across 35 states and 7 countries, and I think it's great. I mean, it certainly requires organizations to build new muscles that come more naturally in an office environment. So there is some additional work and effort necessary to be an effective distributed company. But what I've found is that the advantages of being a distributed company are profound. I mean, the biggest advantages that we've experienced are, number one, we can recruit and attract people from anywhere in the world. And that's a huge advantage, right? Because it's just numbers. You're casting a broader net when you can recruit people from anywhere. I think the second thing that's really powerful is it empowers a more free and autonomous way of life for the employee or team member. And I think that's pretty important because quality of life matters And if you can spend more time with your family or choose where you want to live, that's a pretty rewarding, luxury and benefit that a company can offer to an employee. But
Right.
I will say that had we started in an office and switched to hybrid or fully distributed, I think it would have been a harder transition. And I really admire the companies who are going through that now, because I think it's harder. For us, we were able to start in a distributed way, which made a lot of these things easier, because we really didn't develop any of the kind of office culture habits. We just started distributed right out of the gate, and it's been a huge blessing.
Thank you so much. I could go on with you, but this is all the time we have. Thank you so much, Austin. This has been terrific. I'm so appreciative.
Thanks, Barbara. It's been my pleasure.
That was a great interview. Thank you to all of our guests today, Neil, Rich, Bill, Alan, and Austin, for your insights. And of course, thank you to our sponsor, Dell Technologies, and our series sponsors, Salary.com, FedEx, Iron Mountain, MetLife, and Oracle NetSuite. Check out Grow with Co. for more articles on all of these topics. And you can check out our small business recession guide and save the date, because our next Start, Run, Grow will be during our Start, Run, Grow week, which is October 18th and through 20th. And we will have our Dream Big Awards, a small business update with Neil, some virtual workshops, and our next episode of Start, Run, Grow. So thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it, and have a great day. Take care.